Hi, my name is Jim Hedrick, AKA
You can look
Mr.
over it.
Jim. This summer marks the 45th year I've been down to Camp Cornhusker. And not necessarily for the week. There might have been some years we didn't go to camp. We did a high adventure or something like that. But I was down there at least for 1 or 2 days, or for an OA event, or for a wood badge thing. So it's really funny. I stayed this summer off campus in Bern at an Airbnb in Bern. And Jody and I wanted to check it out before we gave them a down payment. So we drove down there one time last spring. And we got to the turn to go to the camp. And Jody says, "You remember how to get to Bern?" I says, "Well, I can sort of feel my way from here." Because this is part of the troop history, but yet it's more Camp Cornhusker history. Back when I was a kid, your meals were cooked in your campsite by the scouts. Every meal, breakfast, lunch, supper. And one of the activities they had for us to do as a troop back in those days, would have been in the way early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, they would give us a sack lunch which had bread, lunch meat, peanut butter and jelly, and probably something to drink. And we would put it in our day packs, and we would hike from Camp Cornhusker to Bern, which is, I'm going to say, 5 miles away. And all I could remember was that one year when we walked, of course, you had to walk around the fields because they were still growing. Back in the day, young people wore overshoes. Those are buckle up. I had a pair of 5-buckle overshoes, and we had our overshoes on while we were walking. And then once we got to the road, right there at the intersection was an old graveyard. Well, Barney would have us take our overshoes off, and we hide them behind the tombstones, and then walk the rest of the way into Bern and go to the Bern Park and make our lunch and stuff, and then hike back. And then when we got to the cemetery, we'd put our overshoes back on, hike the rest of the way back into camp. But I says, all I remember is that when we find this graveyard, we go west. And that's what we did. It was all gravel road. But back in the day, camp itself, you had 3 weeks of camp at Camp Minneskuya, which is basically your month of June. And then the National Guard would come and transport all of our camp stuff for each program area, boxes upon boxes, and whatever else, and plus staff gear, and drive it down to Camp Cornhusker, and we'd unload. And I don't really remember. Terry might be able to tell you more than me, but I don't know if we were had camp the following day, or if we had 2 or 3 day lull time in between the two camps. I don't remember that, but you can just imagine doing that. But and then we had 6 weeks down at Humboldt, and that would take you into mid-August. And back then there wasn't any air conditioning, there weren't cell phones, there was one payphone, which was underneath the steps where they got the big red cross painted on the wall there. There was a payphone right there, and that was the only one. So kids weren't calling home. And if you did see a kid, any adult walking by saying, "Do you got permission to use that phone?" Because they weren't supposed to call home. And I would tell the parents at getting ready to go camp type of family meeting, I would say, don't tell your kids to call because they're not allowed to call. And I remember one time I had a young man, is when we were in the Fox campsite. he was crying himself, oh, I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to, So one night, it must have been like a Wednesday, I walked him down the hill from Fox up to the office, went in the office, and we used one of their phones, told the staff what I needed to do. I talked to the parents saying, hey, your son's having a rough time, but there's really only 2 days left, Thursday and Friday, and we got him, and he's been spending a lot of time up at the rifle range having fun. So please try to talk him into it. Well, then I hand the phone to him, and of course the fountain, in fact, the management opens the door, thought I was beating the kid because the next morning, his father drove his vehicle into our campsite, the Fox campsite. He says, where's my son? Well, he's still in bed. Open up the flap, the kid sits up. What are you doing here, Dad? Well, I'm here to take you home. Well, gee whiz, I'm going to go do this and this and this today, because we had him all pumped up to endure the next day, I mean, that was our goal as leaders, to help the kid. Another time I had an older scout. I was down by the pool watching the scouts in the water, and he was probably 14, 15 years old, and I could tell he was a little teary-eyed. I go, what's the problem? He says, I did something I wasn't supposed to do. And I said, oh, what was that? He says, I called home. And I says, well, do you feel any better? No. I says, well, that's why we don't call home. It don't do any good.